Hello, and welcome to Gardener's World. The days are getting longer. The birds are singing louder and colour is breaking through. Spring cannot be denied. And although I'm sure there's all kinds of wintry weather still in store, it is time to think about the gardening year ahead. So, to whet your appetites, we're going to be looking back at some recent Gardener's World seasonal highlights. Coming up on today's programme, Nick is in Dorset, highlighting perennial plants that bring late summer colour to our borders.
One of my absolute favourite perennials is this, Macleia cordata. It has to be one of the biggest of the genus. You can see it goes up to about 3 metres, so it's a really substantial plant.
Advolly explores a fascinating Japanese-inspired garden in Clackmannanshire.
One of the most striking things about this garden is the sheer attention to detail, from the planting down to the tiny little knots that hold the bamboo together. It's exquisite.
We meet a grower who adores all kinds of citrus plants.
You love them and they give you enormous love back in return. It's just a magical experience.
And at Longmeadow, I grow something I have never grown before. Loofahs. You can eat them and you can scratch your back with them, so what's not to like? At this point of the season, many of us are considering possible changes for the year ahead. And there's no better way to get inspired than to visit other wonderful gardens. Joe went to meet a garden designer who had been commissioned to integrate a very modern building into a very old setting.
Here in this beautiful Hampshire garden, designer Helen Elk-Smith has used blocks of warm, dusky perennials and grasses alongside a calm palette of natural materials to create a garden that really blends in with its built environment.
This is a garden with simplicity at its core, which showcases how to design with restraint. Helen, a beautiful garden, incredibly stylish and contemporary. And it goes with the contemporary house. But you've also got this, old Victorian brick wall that surrounds the whole property. So how did you, approach the design and blend those aspects together?
This is an old kitchen garden, and there's something that's very lovely and magical about every kitchen garden, and that's absolutely true of this one as well. The wall has the most beautiful colours in it, and they're absolutely lovely. And the house obviously has got some really sort of strong colours. It's got sort of black glass and black flaming, and then there's obviously the timbers. And actually the job of the planting was to bring these two things that are very different together. Where we've got a lot of really hard horizontal elements, the roof, the windows, the doors, the cladding, everything is completely horizontal, and then we've got these horizontal lines that run all the way around by the wall itself. What I was looking at is those lovely mounding forms and the arching forms, just to create that soft contrast.
And the landscaping materials, again, it's all pared back, really. We've got stone, we've got gravel, and we've got decking. And they all work really nicely together. When you look at this border, which has a lovely flow about it, those sort of soft, mounded shapes all melded together to create a really fantastic sort of outline against the building, you actually pick out each shrub and you realise that these are really quite bog-standard shrubs that we've seen in many gardens for many years, and you'll buy them down the local garden centre. But it's the way they're used and put together that makes them a success. So we've got things like the Choisya tonata, crocodata over there. Then we've got Euphorbia mellifera. There's 3 of those, which will flower the honey spurs. You've got a beautiful scent to it. And then these 2, you know, which really are standard evergreen shrubs. Hebe, I think this is Sutherlandii with its tightly clipped glaucous foliage. And then this is Pittosporum Tom Thumb. Now, I have to say, I have to admit, this has never been one of my favourite plants, but Helen shows that it's all about the right plant to do a job. It's got that sort of light green new growth, and underneath, plummy, purpley, almost black foliage beneath, and it adds drama and contrasts beautifully, texturally with the rest of these plants, and looks absolutely stunning against the cladding of the house. So, you know, it's not about the plants and getting snobby about what they are, it's about using them and making them look great together, like this border does. A common scenario is to put some paving in outside your patio doors, or in this case bedroom doors, or deck like this, and have the plantings beyond. It feels as if the garden's miles away and there's a disconnect between the interior and the nature of plants. But here, Helen has brought the plants right up to the wall here and on the other side there. So when you come out onto here, you feel surrounded by plants immediately. You feel as if you're in a garden. And then you might put some furniture out here and it looks a little bit cluttered. But Helen's designed in this fantastic seat into the deck. It ties in beautifully with the second step there, so it almost disappears apart from when you're sitting on it. And when you're sitting on it, you get a great view of the planting tearing up towards the back, and then the old Victorian wall in the background. It's just a great composition, and this seat right here is just making me look at it. When I studied garden design in 1990, ornamental grasses were just hitting the scene. Everyone was really into them, but they were thought to be a bit of a flash in the pan. But they've really lasted the course, and Helen shows in this garden just how versatile they are. She's used loads of them. This Stipa gigantea makes a wonderful division between these 2 spaces. It's a hedge really, but it's not too blocky. I can see through, I can see beyond, and it's light and frothy, and these seed heads are at eye level, absolutely perfect. And she's used others as ground covers under trees, edgings for paths, some tall, some short, and some floppy ones. And over there we've got Calamagrostis Carl Forster, a very similar colour to this Stipa, but it's got a different form. It's narrower, it's more upright, and it works beautifully just to break up the old Victorian wall over there. And this is Miscanthus starlight. What a stunning plant. Its silky tassels are just incredible, and it holds the light beautifully. But is this just ornamental? No, of course not. It's doing a job. This is blocking the car parking area from behind. I can't see anything behind there at all. This is a proper screening plant, and it's been repeated all the way through, and then it legs into more grasses behind me. It adds a lovely flow and naturalism to the entire garden as a whole.
From the interior to the exterior, from the modern house to that lovely Victorian wall, tying things together is what this garden's all about. The fact that it's been done so subtly and so sympathetically is what makes it really stand out as a design.
One of the markers of spring here at Longmeadow is bringing out the citrus that have been overwintering in the greenhouse. All citrus plants, whether it's a small ornamental one that's effectively a house plant or a great big one like this, should be treated the same way, just bearing in mind, though, that many have different levels of hardiness. Limes, for example, are very tender, whereas a lemon like this is actually quite robust. And it's certainly a good place to start if you've never grown them before. What I want to do first is put this onto chops. When you bring them outside, you're going to have to water them fairly regularly, but it's really important that they don't sit in water. Right. By putting them up on blocks, it means the water goes through the plant and runs away. So we've got fantastic blossom growing here, and that will obviously bear the fruit. And as a rule, if you think the fruit are ripe, pick them, because they will inhibit the development of flowers and new fruits, so that the more you pick, the more they will produce. A lot of people say, well, how do you know when it's ripe? If it looks a lemony colour to you, and it will come away in your hand, which that has, then it's ripe. Now, it's a good idea not to prune until new growth is good and established. And what I do is I bring them outside and then I leave them for a couple of weeks, let them acclimatise, and you'll see plenty of new shoots, and that's when to prune. But what I do, as soon as I put the citrus outside, is give them a good feed. And the first part of that is a liquid feed. This is simply liquid seaweed, and it's going to have a feed and a drink. And I will go on until it's running out the bottom. Now, the reason I'm using a liquid seaweed is because it is high on potassium, and that will feed the roots and the flowers rather than the leaves. And tomato feed will do the job just as well. So we'll give this one a drink too. And I repeat that once a week till September. Stage 2 is to top dress them. And I'm using homemade compost. If you haven't got any, fish blood and bone will do just as well. But I like compost for 2 reasons. One, because there's a lot of bacterial and fungal activity, which builds up a good relationship with the roots. And 2, it acts as a good mulch. So I just spread that round, move it away from the trunk. There we go. Right, these should be set up, and I just hope that we don't have any late frost, but I will have some fleece to hand and I can just wrap them up, and that will be protection enough. Now, I love these oranges and lemons that I've gathered over the years. This one, for example, was given to me as a cutting 37 years ago. But my own feelings are pretty pale and wan compared to the passion that Dr. Shanaz Comanche has for her collection of citrus plants.
I can't get enough of citrus plants. They're just absolutely magnificent plants to grow. I think I last counted about 34 in my collection. The reason why I love growing citrus is because they are evergreen trees and plants, and they produce highly aromatic leaves to your gorgeous blossoms and your highly fragrant flowers. You can actually have fruits hanging on the tree 12 months of the year. So being a GP, I do prescribe a lot of gardening to my patients. I mean, I personally suffer from a lot of stress and anxiety, and I have found plants, although being my obsession, it is my outlet where it kind of helps me focus, stay calm. It feeds your mind, your body, and your soul. So this is the variegated pink lemon tree. Absolutely beautiful tree. And this is your little tiny pea-sized baby fruit. And then this will eventually become about that big, so about golf ball size. It's called a pink lemon because the flesh inside is actually a pinky color. This has to be one of the most favorite lemons out of all my lemon trees in my collection. If I wish I could hug it, I would. Now, it's very important not to underwater and not to overwater citrus. If you don't get the watering just right, it could lead to the citrus plants being shocked. And just like human beings, when we get shocked and stressed, then we kind of have a breakdown. So that's what happens with citrus plants and trees. They end up dropping their leaves, or they look very, very sick and miserable. I do use a moisture meter. Well, I have to admit, a moisture emitter, I think, is my gardening best friend because it takes away a lot of the guesswork when I'm watering. This one here is called the strawberry orange. So the reason why it's called strawberry orange is because it's got like a hint of strawberry and raspberry flavor. So it's not your typical orange. The beauty of citrus is that you will get buds, blossoms and fruit on the same plant or the tree throughout the year. So there is always interest in the plant or tree. This is why I just love citrus. The second key point in growing citrus is light. Now, they love lots and lots of light. If you can get about 6 hours of sunlight, that will really help in setting your buds and blossoms and fruit. The third key pointer would be your humidity. Now, they don't like bone dry air. Misting is very important, so it's highly essential that if you're growing them indoors, make sure you mist them daily so that you're giving that little bit of moisture in the air. That's a baby Rangpur lime. And they're absolutely beautiful, gorgeous tree. It's very important that you provide them with cool winters because citrus plants and trees, like other plants and trees, they like dormancy, and that kind of helps with maturation of the fruit as well. And they love hot summers, so you can actually throw them out in the garden or your balcony for the summer. This is my other grapefruit. So this is your pomelo. All grapefruits, they are resulted from a cross between a pomelo, which is the largest citrus in the citrus family, and also your orange. So I've had 3 fruits which are ready to harvest because they're a little bit squidgy when I'm pressing on them. And again, as with all grapefruits, the blossoms are huge, the flowers are really big, highly fragrant, and they're absolutely intoxicating. So I can't wait to have this for salad later on. I really love this. And it's absolutely gorgeous fragrance of this fruit. Oh, you can't get enough of them, can you? I just can't see anything not to love about citrus. A harvest that I get at the end. You love them and they give you enormous love back in return. It's just a magical experience.
Tulips bring a new intensity and range of colour to Longmeadow in April and May. I like to experiment with different colour combinations, both in the borders and in pots.
This particular pot has worked out really well, I think. At the top, you have a tulip called Flyaway with these lily petals rimmed with yellow. And then the mid-layer is a tulip called Purple Lady, which has got a good goblet form. And beneath that, I've got a parrot version of Princess Irene, which has got orange flowers streaked with green and purple.
It is an absolute joy. Last summer, we received a film from Sonia Walters, who had used pots to create a tropical oasis in her garden on the south coast.
Welcome to my little Brighton garden. Because it's baking hot in this little yard in the summer, I've got tropical plants, bananas, canna lilies. Through the studio door, I'm a painter by the way, and you can see the whole of the depth of the garden leading right up to the beautiful cherry tree at the top. love the way that plants have got a life of their own and a mind of their own. So this has grown through the fronds of the trachycarpus and is looking jolly healthy. This is my shady area. This little darling is my favourite fern. It's so delicate with its black stalks, and it can't put up with a single dapple of sunlight. This lovely little plant with its spotty stems, it's from South Africa, an Ecomis. It's supposed to like as much sun as possible, but show it a bit of sunlight and it droops. Melianthus major. I love its leaf forms and its silvery colour. Along to my succulent spot, sitting on my old treadle sewing machine. So that's the end of our trip through my very small garden. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
Come on. Good boy. You go first. There's a good boy.
Of course, you don't need to have a garden to create a living green space. Last spring, we met a grower who had created his own plant paradise indoors.
I just really like the effect of having a really lush green home. I wouldn't really say I'm going for the jungle vibe necessarily, but I just like the way plants make me feel relaxed and just keep me calm. So yeah, I just like as much green as possible, especially inside. Less colour, but just more foliage. Hi, I'm Paul McCabe. I live in Salford, and this is where I come to escape. It's just instant. As soon as I walk through the door, as soon as I open the door and I see the greenery in the plants, I just go down a couple of notches, especially if I'm doing things with the plants and I'm watering and I'm feeding and just checking them. I just forget about everything. I work on the trams in Manchester city centre, so it is very urban, so this is an escape when I come home. I suppose as an introvert, I find it hard just like being around a lot of people. I find it hard communicating sometimes with people. I tend to open up more when I'm talking to people about plants and I'm telling them how to care for plants. I feel like it lights a spark inside me, and I kind of forget maybe that I'm usually this quiet, introverted person. It just brings another side of me. I'm lucky because I do have the skylights. It's a west facing at the back, so the sun does go around, and then I get bright light in the afternoons, which can be a problem sometimes because a lot of the houseplants don't necessarily want bright, direct sunlight. Columnia arguta is it's a really nice hanging plant, and when it's in bloom, it looks absolutely stunning. Hanging plants, philodendrons or pothos as well, they just look really nice the way they just hang quite naturally, and the leaves will turn to the light as well. I would say this is like my hanging gardens of Manchester. So I quite like the forest cacti, epiphytes, again just the way that they hang, and usually you get flowers on those specimens as well. And also Spanish moss. I find Spanish moss is so easy. It is an air plant, so you do need to mist it with rainwater regularly. I like the placement of plants. I like how you can use a plant and place it in a location, even one plant, and it just transforms the room. I'm always moving the plants around. I think at the moment my favourite plant is the Monstera deliciosa, because it's such a big plant and I've had it for such a long time, and I just love the form and how it just sits. I think I like it because it is such a common plant, to be fair, and I think most people just don't actually support them correctly. So in the case of my Monstera, I have a hook in the ceiling with a wire, so that supports the entire weight of that plant. It does need quite a lot of food, fertilisation in the growing months because it uses a lot of energy to grow those big leaves. When you have so many houseplants, every day is a maintenance day. So as I go around, I'll check them, check the moisture, I'll feed them if necessary, and I'm always looking at the leaves and even the roots in some cases and looking for signs of pests or disease. It really relaxes me, and it definitely isn't a chore. Certainly with the anthuriums, I like to keep them in clear pots so I can actually see the health of the roots, because they can get root rot quite easily. So if you overwater them and you start losing some roots, take it out of the medium and repot it. The calatheas and the prayer plants, they can be quite prone to getting various pests, and the most common ones being red spider mites and thrips as well. So I routinely wash the leaves of those, whether I can see any signs of pests or not. So this is Alocasia black velvet, and you just get that really velvety leaf, and when the light shines on it, you just get like a shimmer on the leaf. A really straightforward, easy house plant. So this is a cactus that I've had probably for about 15 years now. This was really easy to propagate. I just clipped one of the pups off the side and popped it into some really free draining soil. Bougainvillea as a houseplant is quite an unusual plant. This one I've had for about 25 years, and it's one of the few houseplants that would tolerate direct sunshine, direct light for long periods throughout the day. So this cabinet I just use to keep the plants that really need certain conditions, high humidity. So I've got the LED lighting, I've got fans to keep the airflow moving, I've got heat mats as well, which is stimulating the root growth. So it's just a way for me to control the environment much better. So this is the philodendron micans. It's really straightforward to take cuttings. I just snip just above that leaf node, and you can see there I've actually got a root, one of the aerial roots, which will form the basis of my rooted plant. And then I'm just popping that into a free draining soil, and then I'll probably put maybe 5 or 6 within one pot to get a nice bushy plant, and then keep it warm, somewhere warm and bright. And as soon as you start seeing roots coming through the bottom, you know you've got a good established plant. And it's a really cost-effective way of propagating plants. I think someone starting with houseplants is just give it a go, or just start with something really small and just build it from there. If I go into someone's home and there's no plants, it just seems really flat. So put a plant in your room, put a plant in your home.
Now, still to come on today's programme. We visit Rekha Mistry on her allotment, which is filled with a curious array of vegetables.
I think I've got more than 100 different things growing at one time. So it's like a mini supermarket, or Aladdin's cave.
Nick puts the spotlight on plants designed to really shine in a border.
What I'm talking about are the tall perennials. As the rest of the garden starts to fade, as we hit autumn, tall perennials come into their own and give that last vibrant burst of colour at 6 or 8 foot high before we move into winter.
And Advolly explores a superb Japanese-inspired garden.
Throughout its history, it's been led by Japanese garden designers, and its authenticity is palpable.
Now, last summer, I grew something that I had not tried before. I've got all trendy. I'm growing loofahs. Now, I remember as a child, in the bathroom, there'd be this long loofah, slightly sort of dodgy looking, a bit like a wrinkled stocking with a leg still in it. And you put 3 fingers in it, and you scratched your back, and the whole thing was a rather an itchy, slightly odd experience. But loofahs are fun to grow. You can eat them, and you can scratch your back with them, so what's not to like? I put them on a heated bench in the greenhouse to germinate. 6 weeks later, they were ready to pot on. And by September... Look, we've got a whopper. It's not ready to harvest yet. You harvest loofahs when they turn brown. So don't worry if all the leaves fall off. Leave the fruit on till they turn brown, and then you can harvest them. I've overwatered these, which is why I haven't got so many fruit but got lots of growth. And the reason I've overwatered them is because I put them next to the cucumbers, which do need water, and have been brilliant. We've had scores of cucumbers. There are still lots on there. I've never known them grow so well. But the range of veg that I grow is dwarfed by the sheer variety that Rekha has on her allotment.
It looks like an ordinary plot, that grows everything, but in certain sections I'm experimenting. I think I've got more than 100 different things growing at one time. So it's like a mini supermarket or Aladdin's cave. Gardening for me is a lot of curiosity mixed with cooking and mixed with, will it work in my soil? Those three questions work side by side. And if it works on the table, then it will be back again on the allotment. I love to grow. Anything I see, I like to grow. It's the curiosity of a seed that just generates so much excitement. It's sad, but yeah, it does.
Because I want to know what grows well in my soil and what cooks well. I do a new mass experiment each year with one type of vegetable. Tomato was a very big trial.
This year, there's only a few that you see, but it started with 40 different varieties just to see what we like as a family. And so what you see here now is our favorite beefsteak. It's called Costoluto Fiorentino. This tomato is actually a good all-rounder. You can use it as a salad tomato, you can slice it, but you can even cook with it. It's a great sweet tomato. I can't do without these, and I miss them a lot in the winter time because you really taste summer through this tomato.
Salad tomatoes tend to be too sweet for curries. I'd often add lemon. But then I found this one, Burmese sour.
They are as bright as they could be, but they're as sour as anything, and it is perfect for curries, perfect for very spicy food. And once I used it, it took me back to the curries I've had when I've gone on holiday to India.
And despite trialing 40 tomatoes, I'm still finding new ones I love.
This one's called Black Beauty. I grew it last year and it's amazing. I mean, just look at it, the shine. I haven't polished them. It is just the way it is. No matter how dull the weather is, they'll just gleam at you. I tend to use these as a salad tomato, just slice them, but you can even cook with them. And it's a beautiful tasting tomato, which is deep red on the inside. It's slightly sweet because I think it's catching all the sun. And I think that's what makes it a real winner. I tend to grow flowers which are pollinator friendly. There's always ones that can self-seed because I haven't got time to grow them all the time. Wherever they fall, I'll just let them be. So things like the tagetes, the borage, the Cupid's arrow, they look even lovely when they're in seed heads. And that's what I like. It's just trying to be as friendly to the wildlife as I can, but still keep beauty to the place.
I spotted edamame beans in the supermarkets a while back. And now, 2 growing seasons later, I'm really pleased with the results.
We don't like broad beans, so I trial them, just thinking they're a Japanese variety. Will they work in our climate? And they've loved it. It's really wet this year, and they've still performed like they did last year. It will grow in any condition I put it under, and it's still going to give me a crop. It's a great all-rounder, I think, of a plant.
Alongside the modern varieties, I also grow heritage seeds that have fallen out of fashion. And this year, I've got several French beans.
This one is what they call the Q Blue, and you can see why it's called the Q Blue. It's a very deep purple stem as well as the pod. They have produced the most enormous amount of pod, and not just pod, the amount of beans per pod is amazing. Right from base to the top, we've got so many beans. It's very nice to find that I can add this to the cupboard, so that means I need to go and buy another container. That's how lovely it is, and then try and find a space in the cupboard for them. But the whole idea is there is things out there, old, ancient, whatever you want to call them, that will work.
This one has been another unexpected success. It's called a Majorcan pea bean, which works like peas, when it's young, and is eaten as a whole bean when they mature. This plant is laden with pods, so it's definitely a keeper. But on this Aladdin's cave of a plot, quantity isn't the only sign of success.
This might sound a bit bizarre. It might look like a nothing, but this is my best ever thing that I've trialed this year. It's called Carthamus tinctoris. It's a poor man's saffron. And I was amazed that I can actually even grow a plant. It doesn't look like anything. You wouldn't think that such a beautiful flower can be edible, but it is edible. What I'd like to use this for is what they use in Spain, paella.
Its common name is safflower and makes this poor man's saffron. So watch this space. It's successes like edamame beans and black beauty that keep me excited about possibilities, about the cooking, and always about the seed.
Growing from seed is just magical. Watching a seed germinate, that in itself. I don't need any TV, just watching a seed grow. That's it. I'm done.
In August and September, the jewel garden really hits its stride and becomes a rich tapestry of colour and texture. I love crocosmia, and luckily crocosmias love Longmeadow. It suits them down to the ground. And Crocosmia lucifer in full flower is one of the glories of the jewel garden from the end of July right through August. And even now, when it's finished flowering, the seed heads look magnificent. But it is not the only crocosmia. One of the beauties of some of the other really good crocosmias is they flower a bit later and will continue flowering to the end of this month. Now, perhaps the best known of these alternative crocosmias is Emily Mackenzie. I've got one here. It's a wonderful plant. It's got this lovely, rich, almost caramel orange. It doesn't grow anything like the size of Crocosmia lucifer, but it's very long flowering, right through September and into October. Now, this is Buttercup. I mean, the name is obviously explanatory, but it's more of a sort of egg yolk yellow with touches of orange in it. Perfect. And finally, I've got another red. Now, this is much the same colour as Lucifer. It's called Hellfire. But you can see it's a very different form. This is much more elegant in its own way. These bendy stems and smaller flowers, again flowering a little bit later. The important thing about crocosmias when you're planting them is to plant them good and deep. Now, I'm going to put Emily Mackenzie in here. Now, you won't see it if I take it out of the pot, but actually this is a bulb. And crocosmias grow as corms, and corms are bulbs that are flattened. And the one thing that will stop crocosmia flowering or being healthy is if it's drying out. And the closer the corms are to the surface, the drier they get. So it's a good idea, A, to make sure if you're planting just the corms, plant them good and deep. Obviously, if you're planting as I am, a plant in a pot, you do it at the level that it's in. Crocosmias thrive on good, moist soil in summer. So if you've got plenty of organic material that holds the moisture, then that is a very good start for growing crocosmias. As we drift into autumn, the garden starts to thin and fade. But although summer is on the wane, it doesn't mean that there is any loss of beauty. Nick visited a garden in Dorset in September that continues to perform superbly.
Around the end of August, you start to sense change in the garden. Autumn is in the air, and with summer colour fading, the borders can start to look depleted. Here at Knoll Gardens, they have the solution in the shape of some stunning, soaring plants. What I'm talking about are the tall perennials, those wonderful plants that almost imperceptibly inch their way up at the back of your borders throughout summer when the rest of the garden is looking fabulous. And as the rest of the garden starts to fade as we hit autumn, suddenly the tall perennials come into their own and give that last vibrant burst of colour at 6 or 8 foot high before we move into winter. And here is a perfect example. This is Vernonia. It comes from North America. It's a prairie plant, about 2 metres high, so it's coming well above me. And what's fantastic about it is that when the rest of the garden is fading, things are coming out of flower, it is bursting into bloom. Now, it's part of the Asteraceae family, which you can see from these flower structures, has this beautiful kind of lilac-y pink tone. What I find particularly useful about it is that it has a very small footprint. So even if you've got a narrow border, you can use it to get that height and colour at the back right at the end of the season. And it gets better because once these flowers have faded, the stems take on a black tone and they're big, fluffy, beige seed heads which last all the way into the winter. Now, you may think that this is an aster, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. It had that name up until about 3 years ago, but now it's Dollangaria. It's a brilliant plant for border backs where you've got lots of space. I think it's got this lovely wild feel to it, and it's great if you can let it rampage. It's not particularly fussy when it comes to soils. It's very happy in full sun or light shade. It works well as a cut flower and has one particularly useful trait. It doesn't get mildew at all, which is brilliant. So all those lower leaves stay on and stay very, very clean. And I think one of the best things about it is that it's in full flower now, but you can see it's absolutely covered in buds. So there's probably another 6 weeks or 2 months of bloom. Brilliant for pollinators and a great splash of colour that will go all the way into autumn. If you're looking for a bulky herbaceous plant for the back of your borders, then you can't go far wrong with this. This is Persicaria alpina. Now, it comes from the Himalaya. In summer, it has white flowers, but at this time of year, they slowly transition into pink. Now, it's about 2.5 metres tall, so it's a real beast, but actually it also works really well as a hedge. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just with some simple spring propagation. So you can just bite out chunks of soil with a good amount of root and stem in there, and then plant them as you wish. Now, something I think that's going on here, which is really lovely, is the association between the two plants here. So this is Veronicastrum fascination. Now, it had its moment in the middle of summer where it had these beautiful lilac flowers, but now it's got this fantastic structure that will last all the way into the winter. So I think the combination of these two forms, this wonderful sort of spiked form and then the fluffy form of the Persicaria, just look beautiful together. What a fabulous combination. One of my absolute favourite perennials is this. It's Macleia cordata. Now, sometimes referred to as the plume poppy. And the reason for that, believe it or not, is in the poppy family. But it has to be one of the biggest of the genus. You can see it goes up to about 3 metres, so it's a really substantial plant. And it also spreads as well, so it's not the sort of plant you put in a very small garden. Now, in summer, it produces these fantastic spikes of flower, and they have lovely little powder puff white blooms that last for several months. But now, it's still got that height, but you've got this fabulous foliage as the focus. It's got a really special quality to the shape. It's almost sort of oak-like leaf, very glaucousy blue on the surface, so it's great contrast for other plants. And then as it blows around in the wind, you get these incredible white backs to the leaves. Now, I think one way to really set it off at this time of year is to pair it with another tall perennial. And I think this is one of the ideal plants to do it with. This is Eupatorium purpureum, and it flowers at about this height. So you get that lovely association of the two colours, the two forms, and the contrast of the foliage. A lovely pairing. Of course, Eupatorium can stand alone too, with its great structure, rosy flowers and superb burgundy stems. Plus, it's not a hybrid, so it's likely to remain upright and not need any staking. Many of the perennials here are teamed with grasses and other prairie plants. And as you can see, it's a truly fantastic combination. Growing behind me is Miscanthus Roland. It's a lovely grass. It goes up to about 3 metres tall, and it's got that really distinct white stripe through the centre of the leaf. But the flowers are beautiful too. They've got a sort of zigzag quality to the inflorescence and that lovely sort of pinky beige tone. I think they make the perfect backing to this, which is Helianthus lemon queen. And this has to be one of my favourite of all the perennials. It's one of those really interesting plants that comes into bloom right at the end of the season, so it's looking super fresh now, and these blooms will go on and on and on. Now, it comes up to about 2 metres high. It's a clumping plant, so it stays fairly tightly together. And then you've got these beautiful, typical daisy flowers, those little black details in the centre there, and lovely kind of deep buttery tone. So this will keep blooming from now all the way up to November. I've come to love late summer for its colour palette, play of light and textures. But to make the most of it, you need plants that come into their own at this time of year. And for me, the most important are these magnificent tall perennials.
Although the Jewel Garden dominates with its rich, dramatic display in summer, the grass borders put on a more subtle, yet I think equally beautiful show. And they will go on looking better and better after the Jewel Garden has faded, and sometimes almost till Christmas. And the range of colours is much more limited. You've got all those bronzes and ochres and golds, but it's the linear quality, the vertical lines, and then the leaves just falling elegantly and arching off them. And I do love it. It's not as operatic as a Jewel Garden, but it's certainly in its own way just as rich. If you want dramatic structure in your garden, there is one plant that never fails.
Croeso Gymru, my name is Ian Jones. Welcome to my garden here in Glanconwy in North Wales.
These tree ferns originate from Tasmania and have quite an interesting history. They arrived in the country as ballast from ships and then were then discarded at the side of the docks. And then they noticed that these trunks had started sprouting leaves. What you have in essence are trunks that are made up of bundles of roots. You can cut a tree fern in half, stick the top part into the ground, and provided it's kept moist, it'll start to grow again. It's very important that when you buy tree ferns that you make sure that they've been harvested sustainably. So I'm standing in the middle of the river next to my garden. It's nice and peaceful and idyllic at the moment, but in the winter it's a raging torrent and almost reaches the height of the garden itself. So these gabion baskets protect the riverbank, so the roots of the tree ferns further bind the riverbank together. We've also tied the tree ferns to the fence, just in case they're washed downstream. Some of these are 200 to 300 years old. They're quite slow growing plants and take maybe 30 years to grow the first foot. but nobody gets to appreciate this view unless they're standing in the middle of the riverbank like I'm doing at the moment.
The more unusual a plant looks, the more we're inclined to treat it with kid gloves. But some plants are much tougher than we might suspect.
Now, this is Sarracenia, and these are carnivorous plants. I've had them in the greenhouse actually for about 5 years, eating up flies. However, they don't need to be in a greenhouse, and I think I've got a much better home for them. Because they look so exotic, with these extraordinary tubes in which they entice insects in and then digest them, we tend to think that they're tender. But these come from North America. They live in bogs, and they are pretty much fully hardy. Now, although they're so hardy, there are actually 2 conditions that you must have so that they thrive. The first is they need acidic growing conditions with very low nutrients. I grow mine, for example, in a mixture of leaf mould and bracken compost. And the second thing is they must never dry out. They have to sit in water. So the very shallow margins of this wildlife pond are perfect. You don't plant them in there, you just put them in the pots in the water. So this can just go there. This one can go next to it. That's fine. There. They certainly add a bit of glamour.
Last September, Advolly visited Clackmannanshire in Scotland to visit a beautifully restored Japanese garden.
It was created back in 1908 by an intrepid woman called Ella Christie, and it has recently been restored by Japanese garden designers. It's quite a story and quite a garden. Ella Christie started travelling when her father died. She was the first Western woman to meet the Dalai Lama and ventured to the far corners of India, China, and Russia. But it was Japan and its gardens that really inspired her. And when she came home, she looked for the perfect spot on the family estate to create her own. Amazingly, she found a female Japanese garden designer called Taki Handa studying in the UK. And together they created a traditional Japanese garden. It charmed visitors until it was destroyed by vandals in the 1960s. And now it's been beautifully and carefully restored. Japan has a long tradition of gardens, and what Ella created was a stroll garden, a large space for walking, admiring the views and contemplating. Every element of the garden, like this entrance gate, has exquisite detail, purpose and meaning. The sign says Sha Rakuen, the place of pleasure and delight. And these stones are intentionally uneven to slow you down as you enter, helping to calm the mind. Japanese gardens honour nature and the wider landscape of trees, mountains and water. A garden is a distilled, artful version, with stones and mounds mirroring the mountains, and trees reflected here in water. So perfectly arranged that sitting here is like looking at a work of art, which of course it is. In an English garden, trees would often be grouped in threes or fives, but not here. They're in ones and twos, which means you can really appreciate their form and structure. There's even a word for the gaps in between things. It's called ma. In Ella's time, this pavilion was a boathouse, but is now a stunning tea house. And next to it is a beautiful zigzag bridge. It symbolises the journey through life with all its twists and turns. I imagine health and safety would prefer a sturdy handrail. But it wouldn't be life, would it, without the odd risk? It leads to a sacred space at the end of life, and the next bridge is arched. Because none of us can see exactly what happens next. There are other bridges too, with more precise stones to slow down the walker and the mind. And everywhere there is considered meticulous precision. One of the most striking things about this garden is the sheer attention to detail, from the planting to the construction of every single building, down to the tiny little knots that hold the bamboo together. It's exquisite. The restoration has been led by Professor Fukuhara, who advised on the Japanese gardens at Kew and Tatton. One of the few new additions is the dry or Zen garden. Traditionally, they were built in monasteries in mountainous regions with little running water. This rippling gravel mirrors that movement, and the monks would have raked it as part of their meditative practice. Here is the gardener's job. The team have woven a family story in too, placing stones to represent Ella, her nephew Bobby, and her great-niece Sarah, who began the restoration of this garden. This is an astonishing place, melding the past and the present with thoughtful cultural precision. That's the key to this garden. Throughout its history, it's been led by Japanese garden designers, and its authenticity is palpable.
You may wonder why I'm walking around with a patty inside my shirt. It's because she decided it was comfortable in there, and it's a lot easier than carrying her. And if I put her down, she'll run away. You comfy? That's good.
But I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. We will be back next week with plenty more inspiration for the gardening year ahead.
So until then,
bye-bye.